People are ready to do the most terrible things for the sake of their family, but is it worthy of respect? And does it always have a favorable outcome? But I can say for sure, if there is deception in the family, then this is already a doomed family that is hanging by a thread over the abyss. My wife accelerated this process. I was incredibly angry when she waltzed through the door 3 hours late. "Where on earth have you been?" "I had to get Chad ready and take him to school. Bobby is furious and I need to get to work." She just shrugged. "Bill wanted us to work overtime for a couple of hours. He even paid us in cash so Uncle Sam wouldn't take his share. It'll cover any time you missed, and Bob already said you were his best worker. He'll get over it." "Did the phone stop working?" "You could have at least given me a heads up." "Sorry. I didn't think about it. I need to go to bed now and you need to go to work. I'll make us a nice dinner to make up for it." She didn't give me a chance to respond before heading to the bedroom. I considered following her, but I knew it would lead to a huge argument and I really needed to get to work. I was halfway to the job site when it hit me, the little smirk she had when she mentioned working overtime. Something was wrong and had been for a while. I put it out of my mind. You need to focus when using saws and nail guns. It was 1983 and we were in the midst of a mild recession. I had been laid off and my unemployment check was quite small. Then Gail lost her job, which hit us hard. Things were extremely tight. We were job hunting, but so was everyone else, and positions were scarce. Especially for her. She had dropped out of school in 10th grade, limiting her opportunities. Her last job paid minimum wage, but it was the best she could find, and we desperately needed the income to get by. Then I caught a break. A friend I hadn't seen in years reached out to me. Bobby and I had worked in construction together in the late 70s. He always said we made a great team and was sorry to see me leave, but I couldn't pass up a good opportunity. Bobby stayed in construction and eventually started his own small business, focusing on remodels and property maintenance, though he occasionally built houses. While most people were struggling, he was doing well thanks to his maintenance contracts. His biggest client owned a significant amount of rental property across 2 counties and kept him busy. "Mac, dude, Jack told me you got laid off. I just lost a couple of guys and thought of you. Want to help me out part-time?" Of course I did. He gave me directions to his next project and told me to be there at 7. After we hugged and caught up, he asked if I remembered how to hang siding. "Oh, I could probably fake it," I said. He grinned, assigned me 2 helpers, and set us to work. The other guys weren't very motivated, which I found strange given the tough times, but I kept them on task, and we finished in 2 days. He then had me replace windows in a couple of rental units. By the end of the week, I had logged 35 hours. When he handed out the checks, I was shocked to see mine was half of what I was owed. He just grinned and told me to meet him at the bar, a small place frequented by construction workers. I walked in, he bought me a beer, and handed me a pool cue. "We're going to play a game of pool. I will lose. When I do, I'll pay you the wager we made. Coincidentally, it's exactly what you would have gotten if I paid you for all the hours you worked." He grinned at my puzzled expression. "Look, you told me you could make $60 and still collect your full unemployment check, right?" I nodded and he went on. "So, the amount I paid you is a bit less than what you could have earned. This way, you still get your full check and a little extra cash that goes unnoticed. We won't always stick to that amount. Sometimes it'll be more, but usually it'll be less. I plan to pay you a full check roughly every 6 weeks. You'll lose your official check that week, but it'll keep the state satisfied. Of course, you could report everything and be a model citizen. It's up to you." I mulled this over while sipping my beer. I'd been to the unemployment office twice, and both times I was treated like just another number, feeling insignificant. I knew they were swamped, but the employees were downright rude, not just to me, but to everyone. "Screw them. You need to practice. Your pool game is terrible." He just smiled. I was planning to share the good news with Gail, but she was already fuming when I got home. "Where have you been? Do I smell beer? We can't afford for you to be drinking." It took several deep breaths before I could respond. "I went to the bar where Bobby hangs out to collect my money. I had one beer, and he paid for it. We have a bit more breathing room on our bills now. I got a little extra." I was about to say cash, but she interrupted, telling me that a few hours here and there wouldn't make a difference, and that I needed to get a real job. "What did you have for lunch today? I hope it was something substantial, because I need you to magically find a good job since I can't seem to get one. How about you? Found anything yet? You know nobody wants to hire a high school dropout. Well, then you should take advantage of the program they offered and get your GED. It will help, if not immediately, then in the long run. You keep complaining about being stuck at home. You could go in the evenings and I could watch Chad. Think about it." She had been resisting for some reason, so she turned around and stomped off. I went outside and started playing with our son. He was in first grade, and everything in the world amazed him. He shared what he had learned that day, and I couldn't help but smile. He was a good kid, and even if I had to make sacrifices, I made sure he had nice clothes and shoes for school, and money for special things like the field trip to the aviary. By the time we finished playing, Gail had prepared a meal. We ate a lot of mac and cheese and hot dogs, but we never went hungry. I never got around to telling Gail about the cash under the table. I just took it and caught up on our power bill. I came home one day a few weeks later and she greeted me with a big kiss. It caught me off guard because she hadn't been very generous with her kisses lately. Guess what? I got a job. She had prepared an exceptionally nice dinner and was wearing a pair of short shorts and a loosely tied halter top, one of her more playful outfits. I smiled, thinking life was about to improve. "That's wonderful, honey. What kind of job?" "Let's eat first. Get Chad settled for the night, and then I'll tell you everything." This made me frown a bit. What was so secretive about a job? We had pork chops, a rare treat this year. The meal was delicious, and the cake was even better. After Chad had his bath and bedtime story, she brought out a couple of my favorite beers. I'd stopped buying them months ago because they were a bit expensive. I started to feel really uneasy. She poured the mugs and settled down across from my recliner. "Honey, do you remember—" "Honey?" Yes. I remembered Honey. She was one of her friends while we were dating, and to be honest, she had quite a reputation. I'm not judgmental. What a woman does with her life is usually none of my concern. However, Honey seemed to have no boundaries. She was extremely forward and wasn't above propositioning husbands in front of their wives after having a few drinks. She made 2 passes at me, and Gail found it amusing. She tried again when Gail wasn't around. I pretended to be interested, letting her lead us to a secluded spot. When she leaned in to kiss me, she found my hand gripping her neck, slamming her against the wall. "Listen closely. You come on to me one more time and I'll ruin your world. You might not look so good with a broken nose, and that can definitely happen. I'd act all remorseful and swear it was an accident. But every time after that, when you thought about hitting on a man in a relationship, you'd remember your crooked nose and think twice. Are we clear?" She was sobbing hard and nodded yes. That was the last time I saw or heard anything about her until now. My feeling of unease was growing rapidly. From what I recall, she was actively involved in 7 divorce cases, mostly as the third party. I simply nodded. I bumped into her at the store the other day, and when we caught up, she learned I was unemployed and offered me a job. "What kind of job? Is it something intimate?" Gail blushed. "No, you jerk, it's not. She's married now and works for her cousin. He owns a motel in Charlotte, and she manages the night shift from 9 to 6. He always has his night shift clerks work in pairs, and the woman she was working with quit." "Why did she leave?" "How would I know? The point is she quit, and the pay is pretty good. $10 an hour. Well, that sounded like decent money to someone accustomed to earning $6.65 an hour. I attempted to handle the situation delicately. That's a decent wage, Gail, but honestly, it doesn't sit well with me. Is the motel located in a safe area? Is it a decent place to stay, or is it run down? You'll be working late into the night when all sorts of unpredictable people are out. I'd hate for something to happen to you for just $10 an hour. And frankly, I'm not thrilled about you working with Honey. She's changed a lot. She's married with a 2-year-old daughter now. Honey isn't the same person we both remember. Besides, the area is regularly patrolled by the police, so it's pretty safe. I promise if I feel uneasy even once, I'll quit. We continued our discussion, touching on Chad and how this job would impact him. I finish at 6. I can be home by 6:45, have breakfast ready for you, take him to school, then come back and rest. That way, I can spend the evening with my 2 favorite men before they go to bed and before I have to head to work. We talked until we ran out of things to say, agreeing to revisit the topic later. Gail persuaded me to invite Honey and her family over for dinner. I must admit, she looked very different from what I remembered. Her hair was up. She wore a conservative top and slacks, and she was pleasant. Her husband seemed like a good guy. I wondered if he knew about her past. Her little girl was adorable, and Chad was instantly taken with her. He ended up in the backyard while I grilled, staying one step behind her as she wandered around. Gail and Honey laughed. If he's this infatuated when they grow up, we might end up as in-laws. It was a pleasant evening. The little girl went down for a nap after dinner, and Chad fell asleep on the floor. Her husband, Jeff, went to the bathroom, and Gail went into the kitchen for more beer. I seized the opportunity. Honey, do you remember the little discussion we had right before Gail and I got married? Her eyes widened, and she nervously rubbed her neck. That was a long time ago. I've changed. I have to say, I like the new Honey a lot better than the old one, but I want you to remember something. If anything happens to Gail, anything bad, and I think you were involved somehow, I'll make good on my promise. You remember that. Jeff returned and Gail came out with the beers. They stayed for about another hour before leaving. Their taillights hadn't even disappeared when she started asking questions. Did you see how much she's changed? Unbelievable. I never imagined she would be married with a child. I always thought if she got pregnant back then, half the men in the county would be worried. She nudged my ribs. That was a mean thing to say. Maybe, but it would still have been pretty accurate. Come on, let's clean up and go to bed. I thought about everything the next morning while mowing the grass. Despite her past faults, Honey was an attractive woman, a 5'3" blonde with blue eyes and a great body. I used to smile when I saw her and Gail together. Gail was 5'9", pretty tall for a woman with jet black hair. She had a willowy figure except for her chest. Men had flocked to them like flies to honey, but Gail turned most of them down. She told me early on that she was no virgin, but neither was I, and none of it mattered to me once we said our vows. In the end, I didn't oppose her getting the job. However, I still made her promise a lot of things and continued to worry about her. I was awake when she came home from her first day. How was it? Boring as hell. Not much happens late at night at a motel. Everyone is asleep except for a few partiers who stagger in after the bars close, but they usually don't make much noise. It's easy money, honey. She came home with her first paycheck as happy as could be. We decided to use her first month's income to get ahead on our bills, then start saving most of it for when we went house hunting. I was getting more and more work with Bobby, and I found I enjoyed it more than I remembered. Bobby was begging me to go full-time if I hadn't found anything by the time my unemployment benefits ran out. We were still gaming the system, reporting part of the pay, and taking the rest under the table. I had started putting half of the under-the-table money in a savings account, planning to use it to take Gail and Chad on a vacation. It would be our first in 4 years, and Chad had never seen the ocean, so I wanted to take him to the beach. Things went smoothly for about 4 months. One day, Gail came in excited and told me that the third shift mate had quit, and she and Honey were going to earn some extra money by cleaning the empty rooms. One of them would work the desk while the other cleaned, alternating days. Does that mean you'll be at the desk alone? Honey, nobody, and I mean nobody, comes to the desk after midnight. Plus, we have these walkie-talkies that we carry, so if someone comes to the front desk we don't like, we call each other. We'll be fine. The extra money was helpful. Then one day, Gail came in looking exhausted and battered. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged. Rough night. We had a bunch of convention guys in, and they left the rooms in a mess. I cleaned toilets and carpets all night. Could you fix Chad's breakfast today? I knew what a tough day was like, so I helped Chad get ready for school while she took a shower and went to bed. She was quiet for a few days before she seemed to brighten up again. As the weeks passed, she started to change. At first, it was small things. She stopped talking about her job except to say it was the same old, same old. She also began to dress better. I complimented her and she seemed pleased. I felt a little guilty spending money, but I needed clothes. I spent some of the money I earned on updating my wardrobe. And again, that slight smirk that I've been noticing lately, as if she knew a secret that I didn't. It was starting to bother me. Then the changes began in the bedroom. We usually made love 3 times a week if our schedule allowed. Lately, she has become more persistent than before. In the end, I asked her about the changes. She seemed surprised and did not immediately respond. I've never talked to you about it, but working at a motel, you see a lot. About once every 2 weeks, several couples come here who like to leave the doors open or take risks in the pool. In addition, they usually meet with different partners every week. Some of the things Honey and I see are pretty wild. It's like watching adult movies. Live. That's why I've become so active lately. I know we've never discussed this, but have you ever thought about trying something new? 2 couples do it regularly and both seem to really enjoy it. I needed time to think about it. Isn't it dangerous for the motel? What about the police, angry spouses, and the like? Do you really want to try something new? It's the middle of the night and there's no one around. If we notice regular guests, Honey warns them, and they go inside and close the doors. They tip very well, usually at $20 a room. It's because of them that I wear most of my new clothes. And yes, I'd like to try it on at least once to see what it feels like. I was already starting to worry about her continuing to work at the motel. That weekend, when Chad was visiting his grandparents, we tried something new in bed. It was great. Gail really seemed to like it. Then it started to take its toll, and she started to keep our family time to a minimum. I asked her what was wrong. I'm just tired of fighting. Every time we make a little progress, something happens that throws us back. Wouldn't it be great to do what we want and when we want? Like before we had bills and a baby? Everyone has their own fantasies. Of course, I would like that. But the reality is that we have bills and a child. Do you want to drop everything, leave Chad somewhere, and run away? I didn't think so. Everything is getting better, dear. Our accounts are constantly updated and we even save a little. I'm thinking about moving full-time to Bobby. He will raise my salary and increase the number of hours if I do that. It hurt me when she rejected the idea. Do you really think this will make a difference? You need a job at an insurance company. We're all healthy now, but one accident can ruin us for years to come. I sighed. That's what it is, Gail. If we don't find a new job where they pay a lot more, we'll have to make do with what we have. And that grin again. One day everything fell apart when I needed a pen. Chad had a bad habit of taking all the writing tools to his room. He was an aspiring artist, and his drawings covered our refrigerator. He was asleep, and I didn't want to wake him, so I decided to get a pen from Gail's purse. I usually avoided her purse because it was always filled with so much junk that it annoyed me. But this time I picked it up and felt its weight. Typically, the pens were right on top. I opened it and froze for a moment. It was packed with money. A lot of money. I took it out and counted it, $2,300, which was a significant amount at the time. I heard Gail waking up, so I quickly shoved the money back in and put her purse back on the floor beside the couch. I sat and thought while she lied to me. There was no way that the money was legitimate. My first thought was that she was addicted to illegal substances. I decided not to argue with her. Instead, I planned to follow her to work on Friday night. "Hon, Chad is going to be with your parents on Friday. Bobby and I are going fishing. He's found a spot on the lake and claims every catfish he's caught there is over 10 pounds. She smiled. "Go ahead. Have a great time, and I'm looking forward to some salt and pepper catfish for dinner on Sunday. Catch a big one for me." She seemed to want to be affectionate and looked disappointed when I declined. "I pulled something at work today. I think I need an ice pack or a heating pad for my back," I said. Gail was immediately worried. She got me some pain pills, an ice pack, and plugged in the heating pad next to my recliner. She kissed me before she left. "Rest, honey. Don't go to work tomorrow. We can afford for you to take a day off. I'll check on you when I get home." She called me later, which she rarely did, to check on me. I told her I felt much better and wasn't doing anything tomorrow but painting, so I should be fine at work. She insisted a bit, telling me to take the day off, said she loved me, and hung up. The next day, I was highly ineffective at work. Bobby finally told us to break for lunch. "Come on, Mac, I'm buying." We sat down at his favorite little greasy spoon, and after we placed our orders, he told me to spill whatever was on my mind or he'd send me home. I really needed to talk to someone, so I told him about the money and her general attitude. "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to the motel tomorrow night to see what's going on." "And if you see something you don't like?" "Then I guess I'll have to deal with it." Bobby sighed. "Remember Jefferson George?" Of course I remembered. He was the rich kid at school. His father had more money than half the town combined. I had caught him with a 14-year-old he had given some liquor to, trying to get her into his car. She was pretty drunk, but she was resisting as best she could. Finally, he got tired of it and slapped her hard. "Get in the car and shut up." He was unaware anyone else was around, so I tapped him on the shoulder. He turned around, told me to go to hell, and started getting into his car. The girl was my cousin. I beat him up badly, breaking his teeth, giving him 2 black eyes, and spraining his left arm. I was about to stomp him in the groin when they pulled me off him. His dad practically owned the police department, and someone had called 911. I've often thought I was luckier than smart, and this was never more true than then, because a state trooper had just finished issuing a ticket nearby when the call came in. He saw the girl and Jefferson and immediately called for an ambulance. He then took statements from all the witnesses, who were afraid to lie since he wasn't local. The local cops showed up wanting to take over, but the trooper stopped them. "Sorry, boys. I've already started the paperwork, so it's mine. I'll drop him off at the station for questioning when I'm done, and you can conduct your own investigation." They weren't happy, but they had no choice. The trooper asked around, found out who my friends were, and told Bobby to find a phone and call my parents. "Tell them to get down to the station as quickly as possible. They might want to call a lawyer." He took his time, but eventually had to put me in his car. There was no love lost between the state troopers and the locals. I later learned they were investigating the police department for corruption and abuse of power. As he drove, he talked to me. "Listen, kid, there are things going on here you don't know about. I'm going to drop you at the station. Do not say anything to anybody. Got it? Good. Hopefully your parents will be there before we arrive, but just in case, refuse to be interviewed until they get there." We arrived before my parents, so the trooper took his time letting me go to my family. He pulled out an instant camera and snapped some photos. The officer waiting to process me questioned why. "Because there are no visible injuries on the boy. If any appear later, I'll have to investigate, you understand?" The officer didn't like it, but had no argument. My parents and Uncle Pete arrived. The trooper asked for identification and released me to them. "I'm not pressing charges pending the investigation. My advice is to keep the kid close to home for a few days. As we were leaving, 2 officers intercepted us. Hold on! We're taking him into custody. You can bail him out on Monday. What's the charge? The state has initiated an investigation and released him to his parents. State jurisdiction supersedes city, if I recall correctly. As a lawyer, I'm fairly confident in that. They changed their approach. He's not being arrested. We just want to question him. For 2 days, that's not happening. I'll bring him in for questioning Monday morning, and I'll be present. All questions will go through me. Understood? I have orders to. Then bring me the person who issued those orders. If you can't do so promptly, we're leaving. After much whispering and phone calls, we were back home an hour later. Dad wrote a check and handed it to his brother-in-law. Here, consider it a retainer. Uncle Pete laughed and tore it up. Write me one for $5. I'm tired of losing cases due to corrupt cops. Maybe this case will change things. After the situation settled, no one faced charges. Mr. Moneybags relented upon learning about the alcohol levels of his son and the girl, along with the testimony from witnesses. Jefferson, who was not particularly popular, was accused of initiating the altercation by many witnesses. He got his retaliation. Both of us ended up expelled while he sent his son to a boarding school to complete his final year. I missed graduation and had to attend summer school to earn my diploma. Bobby snapped me back to reality, and I acknowledged. You recall what it cost you to confront him. I know you. Planning isn't your strong suit. You tend to dive in head first. Consequences be damned. When you discover what's going on, you need to pause and think. Don't act recklessly. Remember Chad? You've got to ensure his safety. He was spot on, damn it. You're right, but I can't just sit back. We'll visit the motel tomorrow and assess the situation. If anything seems suspicious, we'll strategize before taking action. Promise me you understand. It appeared to be the most sensible plan, so I agreed. On Friday night at 11, we found ourselves parked in an empty lot opposite the motel. It was my first glimpse of it. It wasn't run down, but it wasn't upscale either. I was surprised by how crowded the lot was. Armed with binoculars, I spotted Honey behind the counter, but there was no sign of Gail. By 11:30, a woman resembling Gail exited the motel and headed across the parking lot to a strip club. I was about to step out of the car when Bobby restrained me. Stay put. Gail hasn't seen much of me, so I'll throw on this baseball cap and check things out. Don't leave the car. 90 minutes later, he returned, looking somewhat shaken and uncomfortable. After a moment of silence, he spoke up. Gail's stripping, Mac. She goes by the stage name Desire, and she's quite good at it. I watched her perform a routine, then she mingled and took 3 guys to the back for lap dances. The bouncer mentioned that's the limit indoors, but the arrangement with the motel allows them to take their business off the property. I inquired about Desire, and he chuckled. She's fully booked tonight and doesn't work weekends. Seems she spends time with her kid then. Next week, she's on for Tuesdays and Thursdays, with Monday, Wednesday, and Friday being Honey's nights. I reckon she works at the motel on her off nights here. Fancy me setting you up? I handed him $50. I prefer Wednesday, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. If I'm not here by midnight, count me out. She's asking for a lot, man. A quarter for an interview, 50 cents for the full service, and $1 for any additional requests you might have. I reckon he spoke like that because he suspected I could be a cop. So, I slipped him another 50. Here, if I'm not on time, consider it a tip for her. As we chatted, Gail emerged from the club with a guy on her arm and headed straight for the motel, giving a wave to Honey as she passed by. By 3, she'd made 2 more trips. I felt numb as Bobby shifted his truck into gear. We've seen plenty. You need to relax and figure out what you want to do. Let's go fishing. What? We're supposed to be fishing, remember. And what better place to strategize than at a deserted lake in the dead of night? So we fished. Caught a few, but mostly we talked. What's your plan? I'm filing for divorce. Can't see any other way out. I need to protect Chad. I don't want him anywhere near what she's involved in. Okay, we need evidence and to catch her in the act. Any ideas? I have a feeling the local cops are involved. Remember them cruising through the parking lot 3 times? They must be aware of what's happening. That's when the trooper crossed my mind. He played a crucial role in bringing down the local police, which earned him a promotion to the SBI. Now he mainly tackled corruption cases. I'd occasionally spot him in the newspapers. I believe I know someone who might be able to assist. I managed to get through the weekend, even engaging in intimacy with her once, pretending to be in discomfort the entire time. She settled for cuddling and paid more attention to Chad than usual. He lapped it up. He had been really missing his mother lately. That made what I was about to do even more difficult. I called first thing on Monday, identifying myself and stating that I had information I believed he needed to know. After about 20 minutes, they connected me. He recognized me, and we reminisced about the past for a few minutes before he inquired about my reason for calling. I recounted the entire story, including the fact that one of the stripper hookers was my wife, and our suspicion of the local police's involvement. He listened attentively, jotting down notes. Can you meet me and my partner there tonight? I had to drop Chad off with my parents, informing them it was an emergency. We convened at a Waffle House and discussed the situation. He introduced his partner, an attractive redhead, and suggested we ride together in their undercover vehicle. I anticipated it would be a conspicuous 4-door vehicle that screamed, "Undercover Cop," but it turned out to be a sleek 3-year-old T-Bird. They chuckled at my reaction. We seized it when we detained traffickers of illegal substances a couple of years ago. This is how we acquire most of our secret cars. We change them every month. The next one is the Firebird. Lieutenant Brown, the acquaintance of mine, chuckled. Yeah, and when we do, I'm driving. Detective Walters here has a lead foot. While we positioned ourselves, they engaged in light-hearted conversation. I spotted Gail and Honey. We observed Honey entering the club. Brown was the first to exit the car. I'll head in first, see what I can gather, then Tabby will take over. We conversed as we waited. Isn't it going to be uncomfortable going into a place like that? She chuckled. I danced for 3 years while paying my way through college. That's all I did, though. Never even did lap dances. Saw too many relationships fall apart while working to ever be tempted. I'll go in, try to snag an interview with the manager, tell him I'm relocating in a few weeks and looking for work. I have a few leftover photos from my dancing days to answer any questions he might have. After sharing about her lawyer husband and 2 daughters, she noticed my expression. My husband knows. We met at the club. He put himself through law school bartending and bouncing. He knows I never got involved with anyone, and I know he never messed around with the dancers, even though they saw him as a challenge and tried hard. I had to lay claim to him to make them back off. We went on a few dates to prove it and never looked back. 7 years now, still as happy as the day we got married. She glanced at me with a tinge of sadness. Don't rush to judge your wife. She might be coerced into this. I've seen it happen. If that's the case, I advise you to seek counseling and try to salvage your marriage. If she's doing it willingly, well, the outcome is in your hands. Brown replied with a grim expression. I received the same information as your friend. There are about 6 girls involved in the case. It looks like we're dealing with a major operation on moths. Your wife's photo is among the photos of other dancers on the wall. If there is a red cross circled at the bottom, it means that she can receive additional services. Tabby, it's your turn. Tabby was gone for about 30 minutes. When she returned to the car, her expression was worried. I managed to talk to the manager. I showed him my old photos and informed him of my intention to move and be free in 5 weeks. The sloppy guy admitted that many of his girls are engaged in similar activities, but he prefers to turn a blind eye to it. He also tried to persuade me to compromise as a sign of trust. I just smiled and assured him that we would be able to discuss the matter as soon as I found a job. I desperately need to take a shower right now. They escorted me back to the diner. "This marks the end of your involvement. I'm truly sorry, buddy. It's quite evident that you cared for her deeply. What happens now?" "We'll assemble a small team for this. It'll take roughly a month before we take action. Keep an eye out for it in the newspapers. The strip club, the local police involved, and the motel will all face consequences. We'll shut down the strip club for solicitation, the motel for running a brothel, and the implicated officers will lose their jobs and face legal charges. I must inform you that all the women involved will face numerous charges that will become public. The only positive thing is your good reputation and stable job. And judges, as a rule, do not approve of giving custody to women of easy virtue if there is a real alternative. You're seeking a divorce, right?" "I have to. I can't forgive her, and I can't subject a 6-year-old to that lifestyle." Tabby reached out and touched my hand. "We usually steer clear of divorce cases to avoid publicity, but if you need assistance, your lawyer can arrange an in-chambers deposition." It dawned on me. Damn, I won't be able to act normal for that long. I'm just not capable. What can I do? Brown grinned at me. "This is going to be a significant case. We can't afford it falling apart too soon. You mentioned you work in construction? Let me see what we can arrange. Hang in there for a few days and we'll get back to you." True to his word, 2 days later, we were offered a short-term contract to help construct a new jail halfway across the state. Despite the circumstances, the offer came with enticing pay, difficult to turn down even in normal situations. Bobby understood the situation. He knew why we got the contract, but it didn't bother him. That night, I informed Gail with excitement, "Guess what? You know how we've been brainstorming ways to increase our income? Bobby received a job offer from an old acquaintance. His project is falling behind schedule, and he's facing penalties if he doesn't meet the deadline. This means we'll be earning 50% more than what we currently make. It will require working 7 days a week for about a month. But with the overtime pay, it will be equivalent to what I usually earn in 4 weeks. I really need to take this opportunity, honey. It could open doors for us in the future." To my surprise, she wasn't thrilled and attempted to dissuade me. I countered with every argument she had ever presented about improving our financial situation, which seemed to momentarily halt her attempts to convince me to stay home. "It's just for a month, darling. I know it'll be tough to be apart for that long, but think about the passionate reunion when I return. A whole month without intimacy. We'll be practically sore for the first few days." Gail fell silent, realizing she wouldn't have to endure such a long separation. After making arrangements with both sets of parents to assist her, I gave her and Chad a heartfelt kiss and departed. I didn't fabricate anything about the overtime. The workload was so heavy that they were content with us working 7 days a week. The facility was a newly constructed minimum security prison designed to resemble dormitories rather than traditional cells. The main distinction was the absence of a kitchen, and the cells, each equipped with a sink and toilet measured 8 by 8. Dealing with the plumbing was a logistical nightmare. Our primary task was installing siding and roofing. These were the largest buildings I'd ever worked on, and we were able to complete 2 of them per week. When we arrived, only 6 remained unfinished, so by the final week we were searching for additional tasks. Bobby supervised a sheetrock crew while I assisted the plumbers. It was unpleasant to crawl beneath the buildings, but I received extra compensation from the plumbing contractor for managing a team. After 4.5 weeks, the only remaining task was to install the perimeter fence. Without the fence, the facility didn't resemble a prison, and the general contractor explained that it was intentional to reduce escape attempts among inmates. I inquired whether it had been effective. He mentioned that reports showed a 44% decrease in escape attempts in facilities designed like this. However, there were still enough individuals attempting escape that necessitated the presence of guards and the fence. Nonetheless, the state authorities were satisfied with the outcome. Twice a week, I dialed home from a payphone and usually chatted for around 30 minutes. Chad would catch me up on all the latest since our last conversation, eagerly asking when I'd return. Gail would discuss various topics and inquire about my homecoming plans. I mentioned that my time away was drawing to a close and I'd be back the following Tuesday. Occasionally, I'd inquire about her job, but she'd deflect those questions. However, during our last conversation, she dropped a bombshell. "I'm considering quitting, darling. I miss sleeping next to you every night, and I can sense us growing apart. I don't want that, sweetheart. I still love you." That caught me off guard. I rang Brown. "I'm glad you called. I was just about to ring you. Tune into the news Friday night. It's going down then." I stayed silent for a moment, and he picked up on it. "Having doubts?" "Yeah. I've had feelings for her for so long, you know. This is going to be tough on our kid." "It will be. But if you want to secure custody, this is the only way. We don't press charges, she stays clean. And with the right judge, you get custody. You really don't want her having custody. I'll fill you in later. But there have been developments." On Friday night, I phoned just to hear her voice one last time. "I've been thinking. Maybe you should stay in tonight. I'll come home, we can pick up Chad and be at the beach in 3 hours. Imagine how happy he'd be. Imagine how happy we'd be." There was a pause before she replied. "It's too late to find someone to cover for me, and I don't want Honey to be alone. I'll come home on Saturday and take a nap while you prepare everything. We can leave by 1, check in, and be on the beach by 5. Let's try to spend a week, darling. It'll be good for us." I sighed. I had tried. "Okay, see you tomorrow. I'm excited. We have a lot of catching up to do. Gotta go. Love you." "I loved you too." I wondered if she had heard what I said. Bobby and I tuned in to the 11 o'clock news that evening while we were in a different market, but the statewide news segment caught our attention. The SBI task force conducted a significant raid at the Dreamland Motel in Charlotte, NC tonight, liquidation of a major operation to combat girls of easy virtue. 14 people were detained, including the motel owner and 2 night managers. The owner of the motel was arrested for facilitating illegal activities on the hotel grounds, while it turned out that the managers were involved in illegal activities. In addition, during the operation, the manager of the nearby Fantastic Ladies Entertainment Salon was detained and charged with specific charges. There is a suggestion, which has yet to be verified, that he may have been involved in human trafficking. As the reporter narrated, footage showed individuals being escorted from the motel to a police van. Honey was among the first, wearing what seemed to be just a t-shirt, followed closely by Gail, dressed provocatively in a very short skirt and a revealing top. The camera seemed to focus on Gail, capturing her tearful expression. It seemed likely Brown was involved somehow, given the attention on Gail. It was clear neither woman was wearing underwear as they were loaded into the van. Bobby glanced at me. "I'm sorry, man. I know how much you cared about her. But you did what you had to, especially for Chad. You know, when everyone reassures you that you made the right choice and you believe it yourself, why does it still feel awful? Often the right choice turns out to be the toughest one. When you married Gail or when she took that job at the motel, you couldn't have foreseen this outcome. Life throws curveballs at good people. It's how they handle them that defines their character. Now, I'll give you some space. Feel free to cry, scream, vent your frustrations however you need to. Just make sure you release enough to be able to function when you return home to your child. You know I'm here for you, brother." After he left, I contemplated crying, considered a trip to the liquor store, even thought about wrecking the walls of the motel room. But in the end, I did none of those things. I just sat there, numb, for the remainder of the night. Bobby found me and without a word ushered me into the shower, turning on the hot water. As the warmth enveloped me, I cried, tears of bitterness and sorrow. I felt somewhat better when I emerged. "Let's go. You're driving." I slept for most of the journey home. Their bail was set at $2,000 each. She had the money in her secret account but couldn't access it. and there was absolutely no way I was going to pay it. The longer she stayed in jail, the more certain I became of gaining custody of Chad. The child didn't grasp the situation. I tried to explain it as gently as possible. Son, your mother got involved with some dangerous people and did some bad things. She won't be living with us for now, so it's just you and me. She still loves you, but she can't be with us right now. So she'll come back later? I don't know, son. We'll have to wait and see. I did my best to help him understand that Mommy wouldn't be living with us anymore. I was relieved it was the start of summer. Kids can be cruel, and I hoped that by the time school resumed, this would all be behind us. Both sets of grandparents helped take care of Chad while I worked. Usually we'd have dinner with whichever set had him that day. It was initially awkward with her parents. They apologized for Gail, but I stopped them. She made her choices and they forced me to make mine. I need you to understand that your daughter and I don't have a future together. None. However, these were her choices, not yours. Chad loves you, and I would never come between you and your grandchild. If you feel uncomfortable around me or if it's too much to keep Chad, just let me know. Her father wore a solemn expression while her mother embraced me tightly, tears streaming down her face. As she sobbed, she confided in me that she anticipated Chad's arrival in the morning and mine in the afternoon, with meatloaf on the menu for tomorrow. After another embrace and a handshake with her father, I walked away pondering how they were coping with the community's judgment of Gail's actions. In such a small town, I hoped narrow-mindedness wasn't prevalent. 10 days later, Gail was released from jail. By then, I had packed all her belongings, stored neatly in her parents' garage. I enclosed divorce papers in a letter, urging her to maintain her distance from me. I expressed a desire to understand her motives someday, post-divorce. Upon her release, Gail went straight to her parents' home, where she received a cold reception. They gave her a 2-week ultimatum to vacate. Rumors circulated that she and Honey secured an apartment in Charlotte, which I perceived as a fitting outcome. Lieutenant Brown contacted me a week later with an update on their situation and the impending trial. He informed me that they were warned not to leave the state, as repercussions awaited if they did. Despite losing their jobs at the motel and club due to city intervention, they managed to find employment elsewhere, possibly in the nightclub scene. Although unsure if their work involved stripping or more illicit activities, Lieutenant Brown expressed concern about the possibility of further legal problems, especially if they were caught again before trial. I highly doubt they'll receive any jail time, but if they do, it's likely to be a 3 to 6 month sentence. The motel owner and club manager are facing more severe charges, and I doubt either will regain ownership of their property. With the DA running for election this year, he'll likely pursue the case aggressively. I estimate they might receive a couple of years each, although they could have faced more if not for cooperating with authorities and providing information on other criminals. We're keeping this quiet because their safety in jail would be jeopardized otherwise. Your ex's arrest and likely conviction will be public record, which should help your custody case. I'm sorry for the way things turned out, but rescuing trafficking victims will make a real difference. We've tracked them across multiple states and into Mexico. Keep an eye on the news. It's all thanks to you reaching out to us. In the following months, there were numerous trafficking stories, but I was preoccupied with my own situation to pay them much heed. She hired a lawyer to contest the divorce, puzzling everyone, including her own legal counsel. Despite Uncle Pete's assurance of a straightforward case, her attorney was formidable, leading to intense discussions, including one about finances. We met at her lawyer's office the first time I'd seen her in 4 months. She appeared completely transformed. Her hair, eyes, and attire, a stark departure from our married life. I suppose she was quite the adept businesswoman, always marketing herself. Pete initiated the conversation, stating, "I believe we're being more than reasonable here. He's asking for 70% of the assets, minimal as they are. and he's willing to waive his rights to child support. How could that not be fair? Her attorney, a polished individual whom I suspected was costing her a small fortune, responded, "That proposal is simply unacceptable. She's seeking a 50-50 split in full custody, along with a reasonable amount of child support." Pete offered a counterproposal, a 50-50 split, with him gaining custodial rights to the child, initially under supervised visitation. If Mrs. Stoneman demonstrates her trustworthiness, the supervision requirement may be lifted. Additionally, she'll be obligated to pay child support. Before the lawyer could interject, Pete presented a bank statement. The 50-50 split should include this undisclosed account. There was $14,000 in it on the day our client separated, and no judge would object. Any judge would frown upon its omission from the financial documents. Gail's expression turned pale. She hadn't realized her secret account had been uncovered. Just before the arrests, I had rifled through her purse again and found the bank book, photographing it to ensure I captured the account and routing numbers. I doubted her lawyer was aware of it either, judging by the shock on his face. The attorney requested another meeting for a later time. It was the first time I spoke up. "No. Take it or leave it, Gail. If you resist, there will be numerous unsavory truths exposed that you likely believe I'm unaware of. Once I'm finished, any sensible judge would grant me a restraining order to keep you away from your son. If you truly care for him, sign the documents. If money holds greater value for you, then the next time you'll see him will be at his high school graduation, through pictures I'll send you." I departed, catching Uncle Jake off guard. He conversed for a while before joining me outside. "You should let me know when you plan to pull stunts like that." "Is she going to sign?" Her lawyer is persuading her. He understands she has little choice but to comply. "Now, enlighten me about her hidden secrets." Chuckling, I confessed I improvised it all. He smirked. "Well, judging by her reaction, she must have some secrets she's desperate to keep hidden. I believe she'll sign." Many, especially her old friends, viewed me as being tough. Let them experience the struggle for their child's well-being and see how forgiving they are. I did extend an olive branch to Gail, allowing her a 3-hour visit with Chad under her parents' supervision. The divorce was finalized before the start of the criminal trial, but I made sure to be present in the courtroom during its start. Gail and Honey told a sad story about how Bill gave them illegal substances. It turned out that he used the motel for various illegal activities. As a result of the exposure, 3 marriages broke up. Honey's husband also divorced her, using Uncle Jake to secure custody of their young daughter. It turned out in court that he regularly entered into relationships with both women as compensation for allowing them to use the hotel. I was thinking about Honey's close relationship with him as a cousin. In addition, they required their customers to pay $15 per room and, as a rule, served 4 customers per night, which was twice the cost of a room per night. The judge expressed sympathy for their lifestyle, but noted that they had not taken illegal substances. The judge eventually sentenced them to 3 months in the county jail. When they were taken away, both were in tears. I received $2,000 in cash and $50 weekly for child support. Gail was granted supervised visits with Chad twice a week by Child Services, but after 2 months she gained unsupervised access as long as it was at her parents' home. Chad gradually distanced himself from her, and one day she informed via her parents that she had secured a job with a national chain. She would be traveling up and down the East Coast, performing at clubs for 6 weeks before moving on. She explained it was for the customers to see new faces. Gail relinquished her visitation rights but pleaded for me to allow her to see him when she was nearby. The following year, she headed out west and eventually settled in Las Vegas, where her activities were at least legal. Chad still received lavish gifts on his birthday and Christmas, along with letters as he grew older. He adapted well to our single-parent household, especially with the constant presence of both sets of grandparents. When Chad was 12, I remarried to a woman about 5 years younger than me. She brought along her 7-year-old daughter, so we sold our respective houses and purchased a larger one to accommodate everyone. Chad was initially reserved, but he warmed up to Melody, my new wife's daughter, who idolized him. About a year later, he surprised my new wife, Katie, by calling her Mom, which brought tears to her eyes, though she tried to conceal them. Using some of the money from the alienation of affection, lawsuits against Bill and the club manager, I bought a half share in Bobby's business. B&M Construction grew into a mid-sized company with a solid reputation. We secured numerous contracts with the state. Through the contractor we had collaborated with during the time I was avoiding Gail. At 24, Chad approached me with a weighty conversation. "Dad, I've met someone. I believe she could be the one, and I'd like to introduce her to you and Mom. She wants to bring her parents along, if that's all right. I think he's hesitant to meet you alone." Finding it peculiar, we agreed to host them for grilled steaks. By then, Melody was 17 and quite a handful. Our home was always bustling with girls and boys. She'd be off to college in a year, leaving the nest feeling noticeably emptier. We instructed her to send her friends away for the night and behave herself. Chad arrived an hour early with his girlfriend in tow. It was evident why he was drawn to her. She was petite, just over 5 feet tall, with a dimpled face and long blonde hair. She was also quite well built. When Katie noticed me admiring her, she grinned. I believe she approved of her immediately when she offered to help with the side dishes. I chuckled and handed Chad a beer. "She'll know more about her before dinner than you'll learn in your entire life." "Dad, Pam is a good person. She lost her biological mother even younger than I did, and her stepmother has been like a mother figure to her. She's fiercely protective of her. I was nervous to even hold her hand in front of her for a few months." Just then, Pam's parents arrived. Her father shook my hand with a grin. "You don't remember me, do you?" I had to admit that I didn't. He chuckled. "That's all right. I've been your guest before, about 18 years ago. Chad was 6 and Melody was 2. Even then, I think he had eyes for her. I'm Jeff. I used to be married to Honey." I shook his hand. "That means—" "Yep, Melody is Honey's daughter, but let me assure you she's nothing like her mother. Not at all. She's a good girl, and I won't be threatening you if something goes awry. I'll leave that to Amber." Amber, who stood 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, looked more like an Amazon warrior than anything else. I doubted that there was anything of fat in this mass. She softened her words with a smile, but the seriousness behind them could not be overlooked. "I study at the dojo and have black belts in 3 different styles," she said. "Amber has 2 belts. She can stand up for herself, but just in case she ever gets hurt, you better hope you're not around." Melody and Katie giggled out of the room. "Mom, you've only known him for 3 minutes and already you're starting to threaten him? You're getting soft. I remember when that was your first line. Anyway, come in and meet my fiancé's mother." Suddenly, Melody blushed and covered her mouth with her hand, realizing her mistake. Amber and Katie froze in place for a moment, then burst into screams and dragged Pam to hug the 3 of them, and Melody soon joined them. Chad and Jeff looked at me. "What should we do?" I asked. "Let's move away. We can sit by the grill. I have a beer cooler and they won't even notice we're gone." We were already onto our 2nd beer and serving up the steaks by the time they remembered us. With smiles still on their faces, they joined us and allowed us to treat them like royalty. They stayed for 4 hours before having to depart. The ladies were in the den browsing wedding dresses online, while the men had retreated to the kitchen once again. Jeff glanced at me. "When was the last time you saw Gail?" "It's been 15 years or more. And you and Honey?" 12. You know there's no way to keep her from coming once she hears about it." "I know. I should probably email Gail, though I'm not sure if she'd want to join." "She'll come. She and Honey are still close, and I'm sure she'll inform her as soon as she knows." Jeff's observation was accurate. Honey and Gail attended the wedding, occupying seats at the rear, going through tissues rapidly. Despite Chad's distant relationship with his mother, He maintained civility, involving her in some photographs and even partaking in a mother-son dance, during which she sobbed uncontrollably. Jeff danced with Katie while I danced with Amber. Then Chad joined them on the dance floor. After Katie left the floor, she silently signaled to me for a conversation later. As I observed the couples dancing, I was suddenly pulled away by Gail. Dancing with her felt surreal. She didn't speak, merely held me tightly before abruptly letting go and fleeing when the music ceased. I refrained from dancing with Honey, unlike Jeff. I noticed Amber watching them and pondered whether Honey comprehended the peril she was in. The women disappeared into a room to assist the bride with her attire, and I seized the moment to sit in a small nook, grateful for the tranquility. As thoughts of my advancing age crossed my mind, I found myself smiling at the notion of grandchildren, until a hand rested on my shoulder. It belonged to Gail. I began to rise, but she urged me to remain seated. "Please stay put. I owe you an explanation, and it's time I settled my debt. You asked me years ago, and I never provided an answer. Let me tell you now. May I join you?" I nudged a chair opposite me with my foot, and she smiled gratefully. Once settled, she confessed it was more than she had anticipated. Before I could interject, she gently placed her hands over my lips, a gesture of intimacy that took me by surprise. She used to do it whenever I launched into one of my rants. "I'd prefer if you stayed silent and simply listened so I can express myself." She sighed. "I did it for the money. We were struggling financially for years. Suddenly, an opportunity arose for me to earn substantial income. Honey persuaded me, even took me to the club to watch her perform. She was exceptionally talented. Then Bill offered us Coca-Cola, and we agreed. There weren't many of you at first, but I was a regular at parties, so Coca-Cola wasn't new to me. His supplies were almost exhausted, and pretty soon I lost touch with reality. I woke up in bed with Bill and Honey. I screamed and ran out of the room. Honey took me to an empty room, helped me calm down, and we both took a shower. I remember her comforting words. "Well, it's all clear now. Mac will never know. And he didn't do it. I almost expected you to see me and call me a girl of easy virtue. When you didn't, I started to calm down. A few days later, Bill offered us more. I agreed after he assured me that he would not touch me. I woke up at 4 a.m. in bed with 2 strange men. After that, I gave up banned substances and never touched him again. Bill grinned and said my share was $100. I refused the money. Bill disappeared for a while, and Honey and I stayed in the house. She even taught me a few dances, and I've always been a good dancer. After that, the washing machine broke down, and Honey assumed that in one evening I could earn enough to buy a new one. Despite the fact that the thought of going to the laundromat terrified me, I decided to give it a try. I expected to feel embarrassed and inadequate, but instead I felt an adrenaline rush, especially when money flew onto the stage. Honey collected them for me, and in the end I got $180. At that time, some people didn't earn that much even for a whole week of hard work. Then Honey informed me that real money can be earned by mixing with the crowd. That earned me another $140. I was pumped up with adrenaline and a few shots of whiskey when we got back to the motel, and Bill reminded us that we owed him for covering for us. Honey and I worked out a share together. Honey and I have made a schedule. I worked on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays for 1 week, and she worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then we switched places the next week. During that time, I only met with Bill twice a week. She sighed and took a sip before continuing. I didn't sleep with anyone else until my car broke down. I needed $800 urgently. Immediately after the end of my performance, a drunk man offered me $200 for intimacy. I hesitated a bit before agreeing and leading him across the parking lot. We did the job. He gave me a $50 tip. After that, Honey helped me get myself in order, and I completed another complex before moving on to the usual intimacy with men. I charged him $100 and he tipped me $20. With the money from these 2 meetings and tips from dancing, I managed to raise enough money to fix my car in just 1 night. After that, the situation quickly escalated. Bill called me to his office and informed me that from now on clients would have to pay $15 for using the room. Not wanting my income to suffer, I forcibly charged clients. The situation gradually worsened until we were eventually arrested. We still haven't figured out how they found out about our operations. Bill bribed the police and offered us to them from time to time, ensuring that everyone would be satisfied. She stopped, stunned, but still squeezed my hand when I tried to stand up. I must admit, at that time, in my distorted mind, I convinced myself that I was doing this for the sake of our future, so that we could enjoy a better life. I even set a goal: $60,000 and I will retire, find a modest job elsewhere and pretend that I earn more than I really do, gradually replenishing our accounts. But when we were detained, this dream was shattered. Gail stood up. That's the whole story. I became a victim of greed and stupidity, and it cost me dearly. It took me years to come to terms with it, but I was moving forward. Now I am a successful entrepreneur. She handed me a card. "Pass this to Chad," she said. "Let him know I appreciate the invite, but he's got enough family for now. If he's got kids, tell him to send me photos." Stopping at the door, she added, "And tell him to steer clear of that place. Same goes for you. He can reach me by phone or email. If I can help him out, I will. Same goes for you, Mac. Take care of your family." With a grin, she walked out. "Oh, and by the way, I named my business after you. Consider it an honor." And with that, she was gone. I glanced at the card. Max, a Gentleman's Club of Excellence. Her number was on the back. Katie found me still standing there. "Let's head home," she said, pulling me along. "Time to recuperate." I smiled as Melody joined us. "Don't get too comfortable," she said. "We'll be back at it in a few years, and it'll be even tougher." "We'll handle it," I replied.